Hello. So in this video, I'm going to be talking to you about observing labor progress. And what I mean by that is understanding what stage of labor you're in or where you're at in your labor. And that's going to help you a lot, not just because it kind of helps you to know whether you should be at home. And ideally, you want to spend as long as you possibly can at home if you're having a hospital birth. Obviously, if you're having a home birth, it's a little bit different because you're working with the midwife and she's going to guide you. But if you're having a hospital birth, you don't have that one-on-one contact. So you really do want to know where you should be and when you need to move to the hospital. And very often, going to the hospital too early is one of the things that ends up leading you on the cascade of interventions. So this is a really important video and is going to help you a lot. The other reason is that because one of the main tools or techniques that we use as medical personnel, as midwives and obstetricians, to assess progress of labor is an internal vaginal examination. But it's not the only way that we can assess your labor progress. And this is what I'm going to teach you how to do, because you can't necessarily do your own vaginal examination, or at least you might be able to, but you don't know what you're feeling or the significance of that. And it will be the same if your partner did it. So in this video, you're going to learn how to look at other things that will guide you and help you to understand what stage of labor you're at. Right, so I'm going to share my screen here and just go over here. Right, so you'll see that I talk about that as to how to avoid a cesarean, but it's just as much about how to stay at home as long as possible. But it all comes down to that if you are planning and wanting to have a vaginal birth. So it's knowing how to assess how far you are without actually having to do an internal check, and the common interventions that you might be offered at the different stages of labor once you get to hospital, and how you can stay at home for as long as possible and feel comfortable about it and not be worrying, oh, should I be at the hospital? Right. So when we want to assess the stages of labor, what we're looking for, if we're not doing an internal examination, is the sights, sounds, and sensations. So think about that. It's quite visceral. Remember that every labor is as unique as you are if you compare yourself to your friends, to your family. And while there are predictable patterns and accepted timeframes, there really is no correct form for labor to take. And noticing the sights, sounds, and sensations of labor will help you to feel a lot more confident about what's happening, about the process, and without disturbing the natural flow with uncomfortable and invasive vaginal examinations. My absolute mantra when I come to this is do as much as possible for the birthing mother and as little as possible to the birthing mother. I've spoken about this already when I talk about induction of labor. I used it in one of the previous videos. I'll go over it again just because it's a really important thing to remember, that inducing labor involves making your body or your baby or both do something it's not yet ready to do. So before agreeing to be induced, be prepared for the entire package, all the steps. You might be lucky enough to skip one step, but once you start the induction process, you're committed. You're committed to doing whatever it takes to get the baby out because you agreed to the induction. And by agreeing to do that, you're saying that you or your baby are in danger if the pregnancy continues. And induced labor isn't a physical labor or a physiological labor, sorry, but you and your baby will be treated as high risk because you are. So the 3 stages of labor, you know, there's early labor. My face is in the way. Let's move that. 3 stages of labor, we know about those. There's early, active, transition, and birth. Ideally, you would like to be at home during early labor. We know that during early labor, your cervix is opening from being completely closed. And remember, it's meant to be closed. Throughout your pregnancy, your body did an amazing job of keeping the cervix closed to keep your baby safe. When your pregnancy reaches full term, hormones cause that cervix to start softening, ripening, effacing, shortening, and opening to allow your baby to come out. You don't know how far open it is while you're still at home. But even if you did do a vaginal examination, that's a moment in time, okay? During early labor, without knowing how far you are, you're looking at the sights, the sounds, and what sensations are you experiencing. If you're at home, you might have passed a bloody, stained mucus plug. And every time you go to the bathroom, you might notice that when you wipe, there is spots of blood. If they're just spots and they're quite mucousy and moist, that would be normal and part of early labor, because as well as the mucus plug that's coming away, if the cervix is softening and ripening and starting to open, then part of that is some little blood capillaries and vessels that are in the cervix that are bursting and that cause bleeding, and all of that would be normal. Very often, because of the increased levels of oxytocin, which is the hormone that gets your labor started, you might experience loose stools because the bowel is emptying. Its nature's way of getting rid of everything. At this stage, your emotional state is excited. You can't wait. There's a deep anticipation. You're worried about your family, your partner, your husband, everything. You're probably still fully clothed and you're happy to be fully clothed. You're making jokes and it's all very, very happy. You probably got the app out, you're counting contractions or your surges. And even though you're counting them and you've got it and you're so excited, there's no pattern, there's no rhythm. And the sensations that you're experiencing are mild and irregular. They don't take your breath away. You can still talk through them. And if you're questioning it, you're not in active labor. That is the long and the short of it, really. So those are the things that you'd be experiencing. Things that will help at this stage is definitely is to ignore it for as long as possible. If you can ignore it, it's early labor. If it happens in the early hours of the morning, go back to sleep. Find that balance, regardless of the time of day, between resting and getting active, and conserve your energy for when you will need it in active labor. Tune into your body and your baby and find your place of deep, deep trust and intuitive knowing. Connect with that. Connect with what feels right, especially when you find yourself slipping into the fear mode, asking yourself, oh, what happens if, what if, what if? When you're asking what if, go in and tune in and feel what is actually happening rather than wondering what might happen. Connect with what's happening in your body. Get comfortable with that discomfort and the increasing intensity of the sensations and the rhythm that is establishing. But at the same time, consciously relaxing both your physical body and your mind. Stay centered, focused, and connected during early labor. Conserve your energy. If you do go through to hospital too early and you are still in early labor, remember that in hospital, time is money. So interventions that might be offered would be breaking of your water to speed things up. Remember that if you agree to that, it'll put you on a 12-hour timeline. The breaking of your water is an intervention. Any intervention requires that you use the communication method, benefits, risks, alternatives, timing. They might offer to speed things up and augment your labor using synthetic oxytocin or pitocin. They might even offer you an epidural, especially if augmentation is offered, because those two very often in a hospital situation will go in hand and will be justified because they know that the sensations associated with an augmented labor using synthetic oxytocin is more intense than our naturally occurring surges, because our naturally occurring surges are caused by our own oxytocin that crosses the blood-brain barrier and causes a simultaneous release of endorphins that help us to manage that. They might also offer you or recommend continuous fetal monitoring. The drawback of that is it's going to limit your freedom, your ability to move and respond to your labor. It's going to confine you to your bed. They might offer you IV therapy to keep you hydrated. And remember that there's no reason why you can't drink to stay hydrated. And if your labor doesn't progress according to the standards set out by the hospital, in other words, if the latent phase doesn't pick up, because possibly, very often, especially if it's your first baby, you can go into latent labor 2 or 3 times before active labor begins. So you think labor's starting, it lasts, it comes and goes for 12 hours, and then you fall asleep, and the next day it's gone. And then 2 or 3 days later, it starts again. You think, yay, this is it, and then it goes again. So if you go into hospital and that happens, then they say, oh, well, your labor stopped, you need a cesarean section. So you want to be really, really certain that you are actually in labor. And ideally, you only want to go into hospital when you have an active labor pattern. So an active labor pattern is when you want to actually think about going into the hospital, even though you haven't done an internal examination. If you did, once you get there, the cervix would be open anything between 6 to 8, possibly 5 to 8. And at that stage, you have developed a good rhythmic pattern of your surges, and the intensity has increased to a point where you don't want to talk while you are experiencing that surge, where breathing through it would definitely help you. You're wanting to be leaning forward, your eyes are closed. Keeping your clothes on is probably, you just kind of want to just take everything off. You're feeling hot, a little bit frustrated. You might be making low humming or moaning sounds, especially if you allow yourself to be uninhibited. If you've gone into that place within, you're probably a little bit sensitive to your surroundings, or very aware of your surroundings, because when we're in the active labor pattern, what happens is our sixth sense kicks in, and that is our natural response to make sure that the environment is safe to bring our baby into. At this stage, you don't want to eat anything. There's just too much going on in your belly. You're more internally focused, no desire to talk, and you need comfort and possibly even solitude. And that would be the time that, if you're not already in the hospital, that you could move to the hospital knowing that there's still a good couple of hours before your baby is going to be born. The things that will help you at this stage is walking, swaying, rocking, forward leaning, relaxing in a tub of hot water with music, with candles, listening to some of those recorded birth affirmations, the visualizations, the hypnotherapy and hypnobirthing you know what I mean, recordings that are available in this course. Back rubs, counter pressure, double hip squeeze from your partner or from your doula, side lying if you need to get some rest between those surges, and deep breathing during the surge, easy breathing between the surges, consciously relaxing between these surges. I cannot stress the importance of the space between the surges. Very often in our childbirth classes, the focus is all on what to do when you're experiencing a surge and how to manage the sensation of that. But the space between is as important, because that's when you need to relax and let go, replenish, get the oxygen in, and come back and become centered and focused. Interventions that might be offered if you're in hospital would be an epidural. In labor that is progressing normally, an epidural can easily lead you down to the cascade of interventions. So be mindful. Like any intervention, you want to know the benefits, the risks, the alternatives, the timing. What are your preferences? Have you learned about the epidural? Do you know what the drawbacks of the epidural are? Is that what you want for your labor? Remember that with an epidural, you become a passive participants in your labor rather than being an active person, because you are now in the bed. You're not able to actively respond to what it is that you are feeling. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It depends what stage of labor in, how you're managing, and what your preference is. You might be offered an artificial rupture of membranes, breaking of the water to speed things up. Once again, this puts you on a 12-hour timeline. You might be offered that augmentation of labor to speed things up or to make the surges stronger. You might be offered continuous fetal monitoring, which limits your freedom to move and respond to the labor, confining you to your bed. IV therapy and a cesarean if your labor isn't progressing according to the specific timeline, which comes back to what we spoke about in the previous video: failure to progress or prolonged labor. But is it actually prolonged? How long have you been in labor, and how long have you been in active labor? So look at the notes that are associated with that video. Then we get to the transition phase. Now, transition is literally that. It is the transition of your cervix opening to becoming fully open, and your baby's head descending and starting to exert pressure to become, for getting ready for birth. It is probably the most intense time of your labor, and If we talk about the sights, sounds, and sensations, there's quite a drastic change in the way that you experience it, your sensations. And objectively looking at it, the sights and sounds, the sounds become quite primal, guttural. There's a, there, if you're experiencing that urge to push, you're going to have that deep grunty noise. And when I'm looking at somebody in transition, their eyes are probably wide open. If they've been sidelined, they might sit up. Very often their toes are curling and they're stretching out, grabbing onto things because they are getting ready for birth. Their body has released a little shot of adrenaline to give them the energy and the drive to go this last little stage. It's a time where you are fully within yourself, especially if it's been undisturbed throughout. You might be feeling incredibly tired and sleepy in the space between your surges, but when they come through, then you're completely focused. And as I mentioned, all those physical things, and if the water hasn't broken, it might be the time that it just ruptures as baby comes down. Very often at this stage, although it's intense, if it becomes overwhelmingly intense, your body will sometimes slow things down. And all of a sudden, from having surges that were coming on top of each other every minute or every 2 minutes, now the space becomes 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. And if they've already called your obstetrician, he's a little bit impatient or she's impatient, tapping their foot on what's going on, and that is a time where they might offer you an augmentation. But it's what we call in birthy circles as the rest and be thankful stage. It's giving you an opportunity to just catch your breath and get ready for this amazing event that is about to occur. You might feel a little bit desperate and as if you can't do this anymore. Very often transition is described as almost hitting a wall. I can't get up, I can't get over it, I can't get through it, I just no. And if you've got to that stage without taking any pain medication or any other interventions, it might be when you say, just give me everything. I want truckloads of epidural, of pethidine, I want the epidural. In fact, you can just give me a cesarean section. And it's at that stage where your partner or your doula needs to really step in and say, you've got this, honey, because you are so close, you're almost there. And it's a little mental shift that has to happen in your head. So, as I say, things that are going to help you is being held, being reassured, especially if you're vomiting, because very often in transition, it is accompanied by a sudden urge to throw up, which is great because it takes that last little bit of the cervix up. A little reminder that you're about to meet your baby, and a strong presence to move you through what feels impossible and just remind you how far you've come. Kind words and reassurance when you request medical pain relief or intervention and it's not possible because you're almost there, and very often the words they'll use then is that it's too late. It's not. It means you're nearly there. Assistance to move into a comfortable position, the freedom to move around, to make noise, to do whatever it is that you need to do in those moments. Minimal touching and disturbance because it's an incredibly intense phase and you are incredibly internally focused as you feel your baby literally moving out of your body. And this is the stage where you want to use either directed breathing or move straight into the birth breath. Like I say, the interventions that might be offered, because it's such an intense time in your labor, subjectively you might feel incredibly despondent, and there is a sense of urgency caused by that natural release of adrenaline, which is helping you to birth your baby and is causing what we call the fetal ejection reflex, which is very powerful. It is literally the baby being pushed out of your body. And it's vital that your partner is able to be supportive and reassuring and to safeguard this intense and extremely visceral and vital stage of your labor as you prepare to meet your baby. The only intervention that's required in this stage is patience and loving kindness and deep holding of that space. It's a time when you might be encouraged to start pushing. If you don't have the urge to push, we've discussed this in another video, don't push if there is no urge to push. When it gets to the actual birth, your cervix is now fully open. Baby is pressing down. You're feeling pressure. You've got that little adrenaline boost. It's you're alert, you're wide awake. If they are using the purple line, which is a line that extends up between your buttocks all the way to the top, that would be a way that we can assess that you're fully dilated without actually doing an internal check. I just look at that little line between your buttocks and I know that you are fully dilated. The urge to bear down at this stage is unavoidable, and this is what we call the fetal ejection reflex. In other words, the uterus, which is so clever, and we've talked about it in other videos, you know how the muscles are designed to gradually pull up and open the cervix, but they have an inbuilt ability that when they've pulled it up to full capacity, it literally changes its function and now starts pushing down, and that is what we call the fetal ejection reflex. And if you've ever heard of a baby being born and described as it came out like a little torpedo, that would be the power of the uterus pushing the baby down. And when you push, what you're doing is you are working together with that. So there's like a dual action. And that's why you only want to be pushing when you feel the surge and the urge to push. So work with your body. You will naturally put your head down. You're going to grunt. You're going to make spontaneous pushing. And you might even feel that you need to be closer to the floor or on your hands and knees. And very often, especially if you were still at home for whatever reason, if it was unavoidable or unplanned or not, there's a knowing that the baby is coming. And if you see all those videos on YouTube where a baby's born by accident or unexpectedly in a car, the overriding narrative from the birthing mother is this baby's coming, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. There ain't no stopping it. So, trust that even though you haven't done it before. All those babies that were born in cars, their moms hadn't done it before either. Things that are going to help is just guidance, reassurance, that you can confidently follow your instincts. Push when you feel the urge to bear down. Ideally, you're in an environment that gives you and allows you the freedom to move into any position that feels right. Patience from the people that are around you and who are assisting you. Use the birth breath until the urge to actively bear down and push is unbearable. Just work with your body, with your baby. Face your fear and do it anyway. Interventions that might be offered during pushing and birth might be encouraged to do what we call purple pushing, which is when you're directed to push when there isn't actually a surge, which goes against what your body is actually doing and doesn't give you the opportunity to rest between the surges. They might offer to augment or give you synthetic oxytocin to make the surges stronger and more frequent, especially if you've gone into that rest and be thankful stage. And like I said, what's required is patience. So if at all possible, if there's no signs of distress, that would be something that you would want to discuss and avoid if possible. You might be offered an episiotomy, which is where they make a cut into the tissue between the vagina and the anus to open the vaginal opening, creating more space for the baby's head. This should only be done if there is any fetal distress and should not be done just to speed things up. And not even to avoid tearing, because tearing is very often preferable. And it is, when it's done unnecessarily, it's usually because you've been encouraged to do purple pushing and you haven't got that urge to push, and therefore they are trying to speed things up because an hour in you're pushing but nothing's actually happening. Another intervention that might be offered is a vacuum or ventouse or a forceps, which is an intervention to assist the baby to come out, and there's a separate video on that. If the pushing and pushing and pushing doesn't result in birth of your baby, then there might be an indication for cesarean, especially if it's gone on for more than an hour with absolutely no progress, and what would ultimately result in you and your baby being exhausted. Just a few little tips for your partners. Be mindful of what she wants. Think about body, mind, and breath, okay? During labor, it's going to fluctuate between wanting to be touched and wanting to be left alone. Don't take it personally. Just watch your body language for cues. She'll let you know what she needs. Notice any external signs of tension and find ways to ease them that are not invasive. Make her feel safe so that she can go within, which is where she needs to be. You are holding and that space safe for her. In terms of her mind, be mindful of the words you use. So reinforce that she has already what she needs to cope and that you really believe in her. but keep your energy strong and calm. Use eye contact to ground her when she needs it, and convey your support through your calm presence. Labor can be long and even potentially boring, especially for partners who aren't experiencing it. Like 18 hours in, they're thinking, when is this actually going to end? But it can't be rushed. So she's relying on you to stay present. Make sure that you do, because that's what's needed. And in terms of the breath, you can pace her. Your role when you're guiding her with the breathing is to pace her. So if you notice that as she goes into panic breathing, eye contact, ground, and you start breathing in that conscious, slow, deep pattern until she mimics you and does what we call synchronized breathing. You can breathe loud and ideally to a 4-second inhale and a 4-second exhale. Or if you've been taught something different, it doesn't matter. Usually the exhale should be longer than the inhale, but as long as it's conscious and you're counting it and it's slow and mindful is all that matters. She'll instinctively breathe with you, and that will help her to either get out of or stay out of the fear, tension, pain cycle. Synchronous breathing is the most powerful form of gentle support. So practice together during pregnancy. Another little tip while I'm here, you always wonder, when do you go to the hospital? Remember the rule, 1511. You're experiencing at least one contraction every 5 minutes. Each contraction lasts at least 1 minute, and it's been happening for at least 1 hour or more. And you should be having at least 2 to 3 in 10 before you go to the hospital. And then if she's doing the talk to the hand thing, it's probably time to go. At that stage, she's internally focused, doesn't want to talk, and really, really needs to breathe through those surges. There we go. So, that's it for that little video. I hope that explains a lot and helps to guide you as to where you need to be and when to go to the hospital.